remember that morning so clearly, though I wish I could forget it. The sky was gray, the kind that sits heavy above your head like a secret waiting to fall. I'd been alone for nearly 3 years since George, my husband of 42 years, passed away. The silence in our home had become a second heartbeat, something I had learned to live beside, until they moved in next door. At first, I was just curious, the way old neighbors are. A young woman in her late 30s, a boy around 10, and a teenage girl with George's same hazel eyes. I told myself it was coincidence. Eyes are common, but those eyes, they followed me. When the boy smiled once across the fence, my knees nearly gave out. He had George's dimples, the same left-side dimple that deepened when he laughed. I hadn't seen that smile in years. The mother introduced herself as Clara. She said they'd moved here from up north, looking for a fresh start. I invited her for tea, more out of politeness than anything. But when she stepped into my home, her eyes darted around like she already knew it. She paused at the photo of my wedding George and I at 26, cutting the cake. Her lips trembled. She smiled quickly to hide it, but I saw, that night, I couldn't sleep. Something about her face, her voice, her son's dimple, the daughter's eyes, they stirred something buried deep. I opened George's old drawer, the one he'd always kept locked. I'd never gone through it after he died. Inside were yellowed papers, a few receipts, and an unfamiliar gold locket. When I opened it, my heart stopped. Inside was a tiny photo of George, Clara, and a baby. Part 2, the photograph. 1,000 words. I sat on the floor until dawn, that photo burning into my trembling hands. My George, the man who kissed my forehead every morning and prayed beside me every night, had another life, another woman, another child. And that woman was living next door. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? The whispers would eat me alive in this small town, so I watched them instead. From behind my lace curtains, I memorized their movements, the way the girl laughed, how Clara's hand lingered on the mailbox, the same one George used to fix. A week later, Clara came again, this time with a pie. She said she'd baked too much, that she hated wasting food. I invited her in, acting calm. My voice shook when I asked about her husband. She said he passed away years ago, a kind man named George Harris. I almost dropped my cup. George's full name was George Allen Harris. I excused myself and locked myself in the bathroom. My reflection looked like a ghost, pale, hollow, unbelieving. My husband's lies stretched beyond the grave. That night, I took out every document I could find, his insurance, his letters, his will. His will. I noticed it then. The date on it was from 2018, but the witness signatures were dated months after his supposed death. Was it possible? Could he have faked something? Or was it me losing grip with reality? I started hearing his voice in the hallways again. "Don't go digging, May," it whispered in the wind. But I did. Part 3. The confrontation. 1,000 words. Days blurred. Every morning I'd wake up and stare out my window, hoping for proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Then, one afternoon, I saw Clara in her driveway, holding a small wooden box, one I recognized. It had been George's tobacco box. I'd carved his initials into it for our 20th anniversary. I walked outside before I could think twice. That box, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Where did you get it? She froze. Oh, this? It belonged to my late husband. Why? I told her I'd seen something just like it years ago. She smiled nervously. Small world. But her eyes darted to her kids. Go inside, she told them. Once they were gone, she whispered, Please, don't ask questions. I don't want to ruin things for them. That sentence sliced through me. Ruin things. What things? I asked. Did George ruin my life for yours? Tears filled her eyes. He told me he was divorced. He said his wife moved away. I didn't know until the funeral. My knees buckled, the world spun. She caught me by the arm and led me to her porch. He promised he'd fix it all, she said. He promised both families would be safe. Both families. That phrase echoed through my head for nights after. Part 4, The Hidden Letters, 1,000 words. I stopped going out. The neighbors thought grief had finally swallowed me. But it wasn't grief, it was rage, confusion, disbelief. One night, while sorting through old boxes, I found a sealed envelope behind the lining of George's favorite jacket. The handwriting was his. The letter inside was dated a week before his heart attack. May, if you're reading this, something went wrong. There are things I couldn't tell you without destroying everything we built. You'll find the truth next door, but please, don't hate me. I never meant for it to happen. They needed me. And maybe, in a way, I needed them too. My hands shook as I read. He knew I'd find them someday. He planned for it. The next morning, I went to Clara's house again. I told her about the letter. She nodded slowly and brought out her own stack letters signed G. Each one full of promises, new life, shared dreams, lies wrapped in affection. He told her he was saving money to move her somewhere far away, to start over when the time was right. But he never did, because he died. Or did he? Part 5. The Grave That Lied. 1,000 words. Something inside me refused to believe George was gone anymore. His death certificate had small discrepancies I'd ignored. Different hospital, missing doctor's signature. The cremation never fully confirmed. I went to the cemetery and stood before his grave, staring at the name George A. Harris, beloved husband. But when I pressed my ear to the cold earth, I realized what haunted me wasn't his absence, it was the uncertainty. A week later, a storm hit. Trees fell, fences broke. Clara's shed collapsed, revealing a rusted safe buried beneath. She called me over, saying she thought it was old junk. But when I saw the initials on it, I knew. Inside were photographs, cash, and passports. One was for George Allen Harris, issued under a different name, months after his death. Another passport, newer, bore his face but with the name Gregory Adams. My breath froze. George hadn't died. He'd disappeared. Part 6. The Final Truth. 1,000 words. Clara and I sat together for hours, silent, staring at those documents. She confessed she'd suspected it for years, that he might still be alive somewhere, hiding. He'd told her he was sick, that he'd vanished to protect them. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream, but when I looked at her trembling hands, I saw my own pain mirrored there. We'd both been used by the same man. 2 women, 2 lives, 1 web of lies. We decided to tell the police. They opened an investigation, exhumed the grave. The coffin was empty. No remains, no ashes, nothing. Just stones to give the illusion of peace. George had faked his death to escape the double life he'd built. Months passed before the final call came. They found him living under a new identity in another state, old, frail, alone. When I heard, I didn't feel anger anymore, just exhaustion. I visited him once, quietly, without telling Clara. He looked at me through glass walls at the nursing home, eyes wet, lips trembling. "May," he whispered, "I wanted to protect you." I left without replying, because there was nothing left to protect. Clara moved away soon after. Her children waved goodbye from the car, unaware that the woman next door had been their father's other wife. I stood by the fence, watching them disappear down the road. The wind felt lighter that day, as if the house itself could finally breathe again. I still keep his letters in a box, though I never open them. Sometimes I hear him in the creak of the porch, in the hum of the radio, in the laughter next door that no longer exists. He built 2 worlds, and in the end, destroyed them both. And yet, sometimes, when the evening light hits just right, I still find myself whispering his name. Not out of love, not even out of hate, but because ghosts have a way of lingering where secrets once lived. I remember the day they moved in, as if it were yesterday. The air smelled of rain, heavy and metallic, the kind that hangs before a storm but never quite breaks. My knees ached as I pulled back the lace curtains, watching the moving truck stop in front of the house next door, the one that had been empty since the Parkers left 2 years ago. I wasn't expecting company, not in this quiet neighborhood where every echo belongs to the past. A woman stepped out first, slim, with brown hair pinned in a loose bun, wearing a simple blue dress that fluttered in the wind. Behind her came a young boy, about 10 maybe, and a teenage girl who couldn't have been more than 16. I watched as they unloaded boxes labeled Clara, Ella, and Sam. A small family, I thought. A new start, maybe. But as the boy turned to face the house, my heart stumbled. That dimple. God help me. It was the same dimple George had. My George. The one that deepened on the left side whenever he laughed, when his face turned from stern to soft. It had been 3 years since I last saw that smile, 3 long, echoing years since the day I buried him. I tried to shake it off. Coincidence, I whispered to myself. Plenty of boys have dimples. But as I looked closer, the girl, Ella, I later learned had George's eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, the kind that caught light like secrets. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of their laughter drifted through the walls like ghosts teasing my sanity. I sat in bed, clutching George's old cardigan to my chest, remembering his funeral, the closed casket, the pastor's trembling words, the smell of lilies that still made me sick. Everyone said he'd gone peacefully in his sleep, that 42 years of marriage was a blessing few got to keep. But how could I feel blessed when he'd left me with nothing but questions and silence? Days passed before I finally met them properly. The woman Clara came over holding a small plate of cookies. "Just wanted to say hello," she said, smiling politely. Her voice was gentle, but there was a tremor beneath it, something rehearsed. She glanced behind me into the living room, her eyes catching the framed photo of George and me on our wedding day. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible, but I noticed. "Your husband?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "George Harris. He passed a few years ago." Her hands tightened around the plate. "I'm sorry," she whispered, eyes darting to the ground. I invited her in, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe loneliness is a force stronger than caution. She sat at my kitchen table, and for a moment everything felt ordinary again, two women sharing tea and small talk. But when her son, Sam, ran past the window laughing, something twisted inside me. He had George's smile, his energy, even his way of pushing his hair back when it fell into his eyes. After they left, I felt dizzy. My heart raced, like it wanted to escape my chest. I opened the drawer of George's desk, the one he'd always kept locked. I'd never touched it before, not even after he died. But that night, curiosity was stronger than grief. The key still hung from the underside of his study lamp, a habit of his I'd always found strange. Inside the drawer were receipts, old photographs, a silver pen, and one small gold locket. I opened it. My fingers trembled. Inside was a faded photo, George holding a baby. Beside him stood a young woman I didn't recognize. She was smiling at him in the same way I once did, long before the lines of time marked our faces. I pressed the locket to my lips. The world spun. It wasn't just that he'd hidden something, it was who he'd hidden. That baby could only have been born 20 years ago, when George was still alive, still lying beside me every night, telling me he loved me. I spent the rest of that night in the dark, staring at the photo, my mind crawling with questions that had no mercy. Who was she? Was that Clara? Was that child one of those kids next door? The house suddenly felt too big, the silence too loud. Every shadow seemed to whisper his name. The next morning, I saw Clara in her garden. She waved, cheerful as sunlight. I waved back, forcing a smile, but my stomach churned. When she turned away, I saw it a pendant glinting at her neck. The exact same locket. My heart stopped cold. For the rest of that week, I couldn't stop watching them. Through the curtains, from my porch, from the window above the sink where George once stood peeling apples, I watched the way Clara touched her son's hair, the way she sometimes glanced at my house like she was remembering something too. The children played in the yard with a stray dog. I caught the boys' laughter, and for a second it felt like George was alive again, laughing from somewhere I couldn't see. One evening I saw Clara standing on her porch, her face in her hands. The children were inside. She looked up suddenly, meeting my gaze across the fence, and for a moment neither of us looked away. There was fear in her eyes, but also recognition. That night, I dreamt of George. He was standing by the kitchen door, in his old brown sweater, smiling that same secret smile. I reached out to him, but his voice was low. Warning. "Don't go looking, May," he said. "Some truths can't be buried twice." I woke in tears. I didn't know then that my life, my memories, my love, my very identity was about to be dismantled piece by piece, all because of a woman who moved in next door. The next morning, I tried to pretend life was normal, the way you straighten a painting that keeps tipping no matter how often you fix it. I dusted the mantel. I watered the African violets George used to tease me about. May, you could drown a camel with that can. And I even turned on the radio to fill the rooms with chatter that wasn't mine. But every sound clanged against a single thought: the locket, the photograph, the baby in George's arms, and the woman who could have been Clara if time were smudged with a thumb. By afternoon, the sky softened, and the neighborhood light took on that late-day honey that makes everything look kinder than it is. I was folding tea towels when I heard a gentle knock. When I opened the door, there she was again, that carefully arranged smile, already apologizing for existing. She held a pie dish wrapped in a checkered cloth. "I baked too much," she said. "Blueberry. Would you?" I stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in the kitchen where sunlight made patterns through the lace curtains. She set the pie down as if it might run away. Up close, I noticed the tiniest scar on her chin, the kind a child gets from falling off a bike. I'd never seen it before. Now I couldn't look away. There are details that make strangers feel like unfinished sentences you've read somewhere. "Your home is lovely," she said, her voice hardly above a whisper. "So warm." "It's old," I replied, smoothing a corner of the tablecloth that didn't need smoothing. "It remembers things." She followed my gaze to the framed wedding photo on the sideboard. "I keep it there because when the light hits it at noon, the veil looks spun from water. George was dapper in a suit borrowed from his cousin, and I was soft-cheeked and silly with hope. Clara stood to look closer, her throat dipped as she swallowed. "You said his name was George?" she asked. "George Harris." The name landed like a plate set too hard on the table. Her face flickered nothing dramatic, just a half-breath that didn't finish. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said again. She looked at the ring on my hand, then at her own. Her fingers were bare. "Do you have family?" I asked, though the answer was living next door and laughing in the dirt. She smiled toward the window. "Just us, Ella and Sam." Then, after a pause, like a word she didn't want to pronounce, "I was married. His name was George, too. A kind man. He passed away a while ago." Something slid sideways inside me. I heard a hum, could have been the refrigerator, could have been blood. "What was his middle name?" I asked, trying to make the question sound innocent and failing. She blinked. "I don't. He didn't use it. Allen, maybe? He signed papers with a G. A." The kitchen chair bristled against the tiles as I stood too quickly. "Tea," I said, even though the kettle had just boiled and the cups were already full. I turned my back and gripped the sink until my knuckles blanched. The violets blurred. Behind me, her voice softened. "If I've said something wrong, I'm sorry." "You haven't." I lied. The word sour as aspirin. We ate the pie in small, polite bites, two women negotiating an invisible border. When she left, I stood at the window and watched her cross the narrow strip of lawn that separated our houses, the pie dish empty in her hands like a confession she couldn't carry any more. I told myself I would rest. I told myself I would be sane. Instead, I went back to the desk. The key still hung under the lamp, faithful as habit. The drawer opened like a yawn, and the paper smell rose up the church directories, clipped coupons, flattened receipts from diners we'd visited after Sunday services. I laid everything on the desk, making neat stacks as if order could argue with truth. In the far back, behind a brittle manila envelope, I found a thin leather folder I had somehow missed before. My name was embossed on the front MAE, pressed in letters that had faded from years of his hands. Inside lay 3 documents and a photograph. The first was our original house deed, folded along creases that had become fault lines. The second was a life insurance policy, renewed and updated 5 years before he died. The third, a will dated, witnessed, countersigned, except the witnessing dates didn't match. One was marked 4 months after his funeral. Another had no date at all, only a looping signature where a name should have been. The ink looked different shades, as if written in separate seasons. Beneath them, one more photograph. George in a park I did not recognize, sitting on a bench with a little boy on his knee. The boy wore a red cap with a sailboat stitched across the front. He was grinning at something beyond the frame. George was looking at the boy the way a man looks at a future he believes will forgive him. In the corner of the photo, the faintest shadow of a woman, leaning in only a shoulder, a curl of hair. It could have been anyone. It could have been Clara. I held the photo so long my fingers left a faint warmth on its cold gloss. I wanted to crumple it. I wanted to paste it on the church door. I wanted to sleep for a month. Instead, I turned the photo over. On the back, in George's tidy hand, Saturday promises. Promises to whom? I took the locket from my pocket and opened it again, as if the little oval of faces might have changed since last night. No. Same George, younger by a handful of winters, same baby, same woman unafraid of the camera. If I tilted it, the film caught the light, and for half a breath, the woman's mouth looked like mine. That frightened me more than anything. I needed air. On the porch, evening leaned against the neighborhood like a kindly aunt, but my bones felt hollow. Across the narrow sprawl of our joined yards, Clara was bringing in laundry. The teenage girl, Ella, was reading on the steps, chin in her hand, the page light flickering over her face. When she looked up, the hazel flashed. It was George's glance, exactly the quick lift, the tiny, playful suspicion, as if caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. My lungs forgot how to work. I heard my name. Mrs. Harris? Clara stood at her fence, a basket at her hip. Do you need anything from the store? I'm going tomorrow. The ordinary kindness of her voice disarmed me. Grief is theatrical, betrayal is domestic. It sits with you while you plan your lists. No, thank you, I managed. I'm all right. Good, she said, but her eyes scanned my face as if looking for a language that had no words. She hesitated, then reached up to touch the pendant at her neck. I couldn't stop myself. That locket, I said, startling us both. It's beautiful. She glanced down quickly and let her hand fall. Oh, this old thing? It was a gift. From your husband? She paused, then nodded. Yes, Blue stone on the clasp, I said, as though making conversation, though I had felt that stone press into my palm last night. Unusual. He said it was for luck. She smiled without showing teeth. It's silly. The breeze shifted, and for a second I smelled his aftershave sandalwood and something sweet. Memory is impolite. It arrives uninvited and sits in your best chair. That night, I spread the papers across the dining table and turned on the lamp that throws a golden circle over everything, like a spotlight in a tiny theater. I studied the will. The witness names were unfamiliar. The addresses were half legible. I found a number scrawled in the corner in pencil. It could have been someone's apartment. It could have been a lie. I dialed it anyway. A voice answered on the second ring, a man with cigarette gravel in his throat. Yeah? Hello, I said, trying to sound like any harmless old woman who'd misdialed. This is going to sound strange, but did you, some years ago, witness a will for a man named George Harris? The voice exhaled. Yeah, I used to do notary work before my hands got bad. Paper rustled. Harris! I don't keep records past 7 years. Who's asking? His wife, I said, and felt ridiculous. His widow, I mean. Silence stretched. Then, careful. Ma'am, the Harris I remember came in with a lady and a kid. He said he wanted things tidy. Nice fellow. Joked about my stamp being a sledgehammer. My mouth went dry. What did the woman look like? Hair pulled back. Blue dress. Nervous. You know how it is when folks sign papers. Blue dress. I closed my eyes. My vision spun little white gnats of light. Thank you, I said. I appreciate your time. After I hung up, the house resisted my breath. I went to the bedroom and opened George's closet. His shirts still lined up, collars like quiet soldiers. I pressed my face into the brown sweater he wore every winter and breathed him until the stitch pattern printed my skin. In the inside pocket, my hand snagged a corner of paper. I pulled it free. A letter. My name was on the envelope in his patient script. The flap had not been sealed, only tucked. May. If you're reading this, I ran out of courage before I ran out of days. I wanted to tell you everything. I wanted to be the man you believed I was. I don't know if I ever was. I only know love is not a single room. I was foolish enough to live in 2 houses at once. I thought I could build them strong and visit each, and no one would feel the draft. I am sorry. I am sorrier than this paper can carry. There is a second key in the desk, behind the false bottom. You will know what to do with what you find. If I have broken you, I have broken myself twice over. G. I read it until the words blurred, until my tears salted the paper and the letters bled like pricked skin. Then I went back to the desk. The false bottom protested but lifted. The second key was there, dull gold, impatient. I didn't know what it unlocked. I only knew my life had more doors than I had counted. I slept little. In dreams, George stood at the foot of the bed, younger, lighter, turning a coin over and over in his palm. Saturday promises, he said, and the coin flashed the way the locket did. A small, cruel moon. I woke with my hands curled into fists, the kind you make when you've been holding on too long and don't know how to let go. By morning, I had decided 2 things. First, I would not be shamed by a man who wasn't here to answer for himself. Second, if Clara had a truth, I would pull it gently, like a thread from a sweater, until the whole shape changed, not to humiliate her, not to punish her, but because I could not live another day with only half the story inhabiting my house like a shadow. I put the letter in my apron pocket and went next door. The boards creaked under my feet as if remembering his step. Before I could knock, the door opened. Ella stood there, hazel irises catching the morning. She tilted her head the way George used to when I said his name softly from across a crowded room. "Hi," she said, shy and bright. "Mom's in the kitchen. Do you want to come in?" I stepped over the threshold into a second life I had never agreed to live. The girl led me down a narrow hallway that smelled of soap and warm bread. Family photographs lined the walls, ordinary snapshots of birthdays and school plays, but there, in one frame, half hidden behind another, was the unmistakable curve of George's smile. Not in the foreground, not flaunted, just a reflection caught in glass, blurred but alive. I stopped walking. "Mom," Ella called, "Mrs. Harris is here." Clara appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. For a heartbeat, she looked like any young mother caught in the middle of chores, but then she saw my face and the color drained from hers. I held out the envelope I'd found. "I think," I said, my voice shaking in ways I couldn't control, "this belongs to you." She took it slowly, as if afraid it might explode. Her thumb brushed the flap. She didn't open it. "Where did you get this?" "In my husband's closet," I said. "You remember him, don't you? George Allen Harris?" The name seemed to strike the air between us like a bell. The house fell silent. Even the ticking clock hesitated. Behind her, the boys' laughter stopped mid-video game, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the space like static. Clara swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have—" "I shouldn't have what? Found out? Existed?" My words came too fast, too sharp. I hadn't meant to shout, but 40 years of loyalty had curdled overnight, and anger was the only shape it could take. She put a hand on the counter to steady herself. "Please, May. The children—" "I have no children," I said. Thanks to him. Thanks to the man who promised me forever and left me with shadows. Her eyes softened, and that pity made me angrier than anything. "He told me you'd gone," she whispered. "He said you were divorced, that you'd found someone new. I didn't know until the funeral." I blinked. "You were there?" "In the back, with Ella." Her voice broke. "I had to see for myself. I thought maybe it was a mistake." The kitchen tilted. I gripped the table edge until the room steadied. "So it's true," I murmured. "All of it." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "He said he'd fix everything, that he loved you, but he couldn't live 2 lives anymore. He promised he'd tell you." I laughed, the sound hollow and cracked. "He did tell me, Clara, in a letter I found after he was dead. He just forgot to mention the part where his other wife and children lived next door." She covered her mouth, sobbing silently. "I wanted to hate her, but hate requires certainty, and all I felt was exhaustion." "I didn't mean for you to move here," she said when she could speak again. "I didn't know it was you. The landlord never said—" I don't believe in coincidence anymore." She reached out, but I stepped back. Her hand hovered in the air, trembling. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." I looked around the kitchen, the cereal boxes, the school papers pinned to the fridge with cartoon magnets, the smell of butter and soap. A normal life, a life built out of my husband's lies. I left without another word. The cool air outside hit my face like absolution. On the short walk home I tried to breathe, but every inhale tasted of betrayal. That night I dreamed of George again. He stood at the garden fence, smiling that tired smile he used when caught between apology and excuse. "It wasn't supposed to hurt," he said. "I thought I could keep everyone safe." I woke to the sound of wind rattling the windows. On the nightstand lay his letter, the paper curled at the edges as if trying to hide itself. I read it again, searching for meaning between the lines, but there was none, just guilt dressed as love. In the morning, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee I didn't drink. Clara's curtains were drawn. I could hear the children arguing over breakfast. They didn't know, of course. To them, their father was a story that ended in tragedy, not deception. I wondered if that was kinder. Later that day, a small envelope slid under my door. Inside was a note in Clara's handwriting. "I can't undo what he did, but you deserve the truth. Look behind the loose brick on your garden wall and see." I went out immediately. The garden wall had been crumbling for years. George always said he'd fix it when he had time. I found the loose brick easily, the mortar already flaking away. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was another envelope. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure the whole neighborhood could hear it. The letter inside was in George's hand again, dated 2 days before his supposed heart attack. May, if I could start again, I'd choose honesty over comfort. But I was a coward. There are things you don't know about money, about promises I made. If anything happens to me, talk to Clara. She'll tell you what I couldn't. Don't hate her. She never asked for this. I stared at the words until they swam. Promises, money, a coward. The truth lived next door, and I had spent 3 years planting flowers over the grave of a lie. I folded the letter and slipped it into my apron pocket. Across the fence, Clara was hanging laundry, her eyes red but determined. For a moment our gazes met. She didn't wave, and neither did I. There was nothing left to say, yet everything left to uncover. That evening, as the sun bled out behind the rooftops, I noticed something strange. A manila folder had been slid through my mail slot. No return address. Inside were photocopies of documents, bank statements, a second mortgage I'd never signed, and a safety deposit box receipt under the name G.A. Harris and C. Morton. Clara's maiden name, perhaps. The box was held at a bank downtown. He hadn't just built 2 lives. He'd funded them. I pressed my palm against the folder, feeling the thin pulse of paper. For the first time since George's death, I wasn't afraid of the truth. I was hungry for it. Tomorrow I would go to the bank, and whatever I found there, whether ashes or ghosts or the last lie of a man who loved too many people, I would face it, because the dead can't keep secrets forever. The next morning, the sky was bruised purple. the kind of color that warns you something's coming. I took the folder and George's letter, tucked them in my purse, and walked to the bank. My hands trembled as I handed the clerk the receipt with his name. She scanned it, frowning slightly, then disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she was carrying a small, dust-coated box, Safety Deposit Box 218. My heart hammered against my ribs as she left me alone in a private booth. The metal was cold beneath my fingers, and for a second I almost couldn't bring myself to open it. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, all addressed in George's handwriting, some to me, some to Clara, some to no one at all. I lifted one marked, "To the woman I owe everything." The paper smelled faintly of tobacco and guilt. His words spilled like confession. "May, if you ever find this, know that I loved you first. But I made promises I couldn't keep. I was afraid of being alone, afraid of losing the parts of myself each of you loved. Clara never knew about you until it was too late. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could die before the truth caught up. Forgive me. I sat there for a long time, listening to the clock tick somewhere beyond the walls. Then I found another letter, this one addressed to Sam. Son, if anyone ever tells you I wasn't brave, tell them they're right. Bravery is facing what you've broken, and I couldn't. I hope you grow up to be better than the man who gave you his name." Tears blurred the ink. The boy next door, his son. I pressed the envelope to my chest. When I got home, Clara was waiting by the fence. She must have known where I'd gone. Her eyes were red, her face pale. Without a word, I handed her the letter addressed to her. She took it like it weighed 1,000 years. "I thought I hated him," I whispered, "but now I just miss the man I thought he was." She nodded, eyes glistening. We both loved a ghost. The wind rustled between us, carrying the faint scent of George's favorite cologne, something neither of us had worn, yet somehow it lingered. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was guilt. That night, I burned the letters one by one in the fireplace. The smoke curled upward like restless spirits, disappearing into the chimney and out into the night. I didn't keep any of them, not even mine. When the fire dimmed, I sat in the quiet and realized something. George had lived 2 lives, but I would not live half of one anymore. Clara moved away a few weeks later. Her children waved goodbye from their car, their faces innocent, untouched by the sins of the man who'd tied us together. I waved back, my heart finally steady, and when the house next door fell silent again, I whispered into the empty air, "Rest now, George, both of you." Then I closed the door, and, at last, the past.